All right, let's just jump right into this explainer. Today, we're taking on one of history's absolute most terrifying mysteries. We're going to see exactly how cold, hard data stepped in and completely systematically dismantled a global supernatural legend. For decades, the entire world was totally gripped by this idea that opening an ancient Egyptian tomb unleashed a deadly, unstoppable force. But today, well, today we're putting that myth right under the microscope. Back in 1923, you literally could not escape this chilling quote. After a wealthy British lord died in agony in his Cairo hotel room, a terrifying rumor spread. It spread like wildfire. People were whispering about this ancient warning supposedly inscribed on a 3,000-year-old tomb. And honestly, just hearing it kind of gives you a shiver, right? It tapped perfectly into humanity's oldest, most deep-rooted fear. The idea that the dead can reach back from the grave to violently protect what's theirs. It had the public's imagination in an absolute chokehold. So, naturally, everyone was suddenly asking, was this curse actually real? With media hysteria mounting, newspapers screaming about ancient revenge, and bodies supposedly piling up, the whole world was left wondering if disturbing the dead had unleashed a genuine supernatural force. Now, it's pretty easy for us to look back today and scoff, but you have to understand, at the time, people were genuinely terrified. To really get why, we need to look at how this all started. To understand the massive stakes here, picture this number. 5,398. Back in November 1922, British archaeologist Howard Carter finally broke through a sealed door in the Valley of the Kings. Inside King Tutankhamun's tomb, he uncovered a staggering 5,398 pristine historical artifacts. We are talking solid gold coffins, a dagger literally made out of meteorite iron, all of it entirely untouched for 3 millennia. It was, without a doubt, the greatest archaeological discovery in human history. But almost immediately after this monumental discovery, a chain of deeply, deeply unsettling events kicked off, sparking absolute hysteria. First, a cobra, which just happens to be the ultimate ancient symbol of Egyptian royalty, somehow slithers right into a cage in Howard Carter's house and eats his pet canary. Then, a novelist named Marie Corelli actually publishes a public warning 12 days before the expedition's sponsor died, claiming that severe punishment awaited anyone entering a sealed tomb. The stage for a global panic was perfectly set. The terror really hit a boiling point with that expedition sponsor I mentioned, Lord Carnarvon. After spending the modern equivalent of over 50 million rupees funding the dig, he died in Cairo. He'd nicked an infected mosquito bite while shaving, and he passed away at exactly 1:55 a.m. on April 5, 1923. And get this, at that exact moment, the entire city of Cairo inexplicably lost power. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away in England, his pet dog suddenly started howling and died that very same night. No way, right? This just brilliantly illustrates how panic snowballs. Because over the next 6 years, 22 people connected either directly or indirectly to the tomb died under really bizarre circumstances. An American financier died of a fever the day after visiting. The radiologist who x-rayed the mummy died suddenly. Carnarvon's secretary died of a blood clot, and tragically, when his 78-year-old father, Lord Westbury, heard the news, he jumped from his 7th-floor apartment in London. The newspapers officially declared it, "We have a full-blown curse." But the ultimate chilling detail, the one that made even the hardcore skeptics pause, emerged during a 1926 autopsy of the mummy. Doctors found a circular mark on King Tutankhamun's mummified cheek, and, incredibly, it matched the exact precise location of Lord Carnarvon's fatal mosquito bite, the same cheek, the exact same spot, a 3,000-year-old mummy and a modern British lord marked in the exact same way. Now, if we stop the story right there, it's so easy to buy into the myth, isn't it? It sounds exactly like a Hollywood horror movie. But what happens when we look at these events through the lens of pure science? How does this narrative actually hold up when we stop staring at the shadows and start looking at the cold, hard data? Well, prepare to have your mind completely changed. First off, remember that terrifying warning about death coming on swift wings? Yeah, it was completely fake. It never existed. Decades later, the tomb's security chief confessed that a competitive journalist, who was totally desperate for a scoop because another paper had exclusive rights, basically went around asking if there were any curses. An amateur archaeologist fed the media the fake story, and the excavation team, they just smiled and stayed silent to keep the superstitious local workers from running away. The world's most famous curse wasn't magic at all. It was just a reporter's imagination and a team's strategic silence. Furthermore, biological analysis of the mummy completely rewrote the narrative. Far from some powerful, avenging demon, King Tut was actually a frail, sick teenager. Royal inbreeding, his parents were literally siblings, led to severe genetic disorders. He had a debilitating clubfoot, which actually perfectly explains why Carter found 130 walking sticks in the tomb. He also suffered from Kohler's bone disease and showed evidence of malaria. He could barely walk unassisted. Okay, but what about all those mysterious fevers striking down visitors? Enter biology. In 1963, scientists examined museum workers and archaeologists and identified a microscopic culprit, Aspergillus niger. This fungus had been lying dormant inside these tombs for millennia. When it's disturbed and inhaled by humans, it causes severe respiratory inflammation. So yes, people did get sick, but it was from a microscopic fungus, not a magical spell. And crucially, it could have been easily cured if modern antibiotics had existed at the time. Let's apply some basic logic to dismantle the rest of these supernatural claims. The famous Cairo blackout? Historians point out that Cairo's power grid was notoriously faulty in the 1920s. Power cuts were an everyday occurrence. The dog dying at the exact same moment? Time zone differences actually prove that false. Lord Carnarvon died at 1:55 a.m. Cairo time, but the dog died at 4 a.m. in England. The times just do not match up. And a mosquito bite? Look, before penicillin was invented, any minor infection was a potential death sentence, especially for a man who went to Egypt specifically because his health was already failing. But the absolute nail in the coffin comes down to pure statistics. When the famous skeptic and investigator James Randi finally tracked the 22 people supposedly killed by the curse, he ran the numbers and found their average age of death was 73 years old. Think about that for a second. For the 1920s and 30s, that wasn't a curse. That was just a wonderfully long, healthy life expectancy. And a 2002 medical study backed this up completely. Researchers tracked 44 Westerners who were in Egypt during the discovery. 25 of them physically entered the tomb and 19 did not. The result? There was absolutely zero statistically significant difference in the lifespan of those who entered the tomb versus those who stayed outside. The curse had literally zero effect on mortality. The myth just completely crumbles when we look at the primary targets. I mean, if a curse was real, the main culprits should be the first to go, right? But the timeline shows the exact opposite. Lady Evelyn, one of the first people inside, lived to be 78, dying way later in 1980. Dr. Douglas Derry, the guy who physically unwrapped and autopsied the mummy, he lived to the ripe old age of 87. And Howard Carter, the man who actually discovered the tomb and broke the seal, he lived another 16 years, passing away at age 64 from entirely natural causes. I absolutely love this detail. For 16 long years after opening the tomb, panicked reporters would constantly track Howard Carter down, essentially asking him if the curse was catching up to him yet. And his response, the ultimate dry defiance of the world's media hysteria, was always just a calm, simple reassurance: I am still alive. The man who disturbed the pharaoh the most was doing just fine. You know, there is a really beautiful historical irony to all of this. Ancient Egyptians held a very specific belief about death. They believed that a person experiences a second, final death only when people completely stop speaking their name. To be totally forgotten, that was the true curse. And that brings us to a really fascinating conclusion. King Tutankhamun was a forgotten minor king. His successors actively tried to erase him from history, and for 3,000 years, nobody spoke his name. But by uncovering his tomb, and more importantly, by rigorously analyzing the facts and using science to turn a superstitious myth into a globally recognized study, didn't we actually save him? By debunking the myth, didn't science ultimately give this forgotten boy king the exact eternal life he was promised? Something to think about the next time you hear a ghost story.